It's 7:30 and 50 seconds. So we're going to be respectful to everybody's time, and we're going to start now. Well, it's still 7:30. Reminder at the very outset, please silence your cell phones. We'll try to remember once again at the end to remind everybody to... so that everybody can hear.
Never thought of that.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our fifth installment of Hilchos 101, a fresh halachic perspective on basic Jewish practices. Tonight we're going to be talking about mitzvah, halacha, minhag, commandments, the laws and customs, and how we can navigate the labyrinth of the observant life. I have to thank Nancy, because the word labyrinth was on my head because of last week's class. And thank you to Nancy for reminding me of that word. And so, at that time, when I came up with the title, it went in there. So, what we're going to be looking at tonight is an understanding of how we navigate the life of essentially Orthodox Judaism or observant Judaism. Maybe Orthodox is more of a loaded term, and through looking at the questions which were put together on the flyer. And also taking a step back and looking, I guess, from a more macro perspective, a more global perspective of how halacha, Jewish law, Jewish life has evolved over time. I just want to begin with a couple of introductory halachos, and you'll decide whether these are halachos or minhagim, or maybe even commandments. There's a halacha in the laws of Beis HaKnesses, the laws of Shul. Ein yeshenim bebeis HaKnesses. You're not allowed to sleep in Shul. Afilu shenas arai, even a temporary or a small nap. So those of you who had any ideas for tonight, this is why we're in this room and not in the Beis Medrash, because it says aval bebeis hamedrash mutter. It is permissible to take a nap in the Beis Medrash. So if anybody wants to listen, we have a microphone. You can go into that room and however it works for you. Okay, that's number one. Number two. So is that halacha, or is that a custom, or is that a minhag? Since some people do fall asleep during the sermon, I would hope that it's merely a minhag. Next, the Shulchan Aruch says in the laws of Birchos HaShachar that a person tzarich lizaher, a person needs to be very careful milahafsik b'dibur, against speaking, against interrupting with speech, mishayaschil baruch she'amar ad sof yirches, from speaking from the beginning of Baruch She'amar, which means the beginning of Pesukei Zimra, until the end of Shemona Esrei. Now, the reason why I mention that is, aside from the halacha, which I think everybody knows, but is the way in which the halacha is presented. When the Shulchan Aruch says tzarich lizaher, a person needs to be very careful. What does that mean? Does that mean that this is a halacha, it's an absolute mandate that a person shouldn't be speaking? Or does it mean that, hey, this is a nice suggestion, this is a good idea, tzarich lizaher? Okay, so I'm going to leave that open for now, probably not going to get back to it, but just wanted to show that when it comes to reading through the Shulchan Aruch as an example, the Shulchan Aruch being one code of Jewish law, there are other codes as well. There's the Tur, there is the Rambam, in his Mishnah Torah, and others, many other codes of Jewish law, some not as famous or some not as turned to, but nonetheless, the Shulchan Aruch is a classic one in which it has many examples of things which are highly recommended practice for the observant Jew. Does that mean it's a halacha? Does that mean that it's a minhag? Does that mean that it's a mitzvah? So this is what we're going to get into this evening. So I want to begin with the question of, if something is not in the Torah, can it be a mitzvah? We're all familiar with the idea that the Torah is primarily a law book. It has, of course, much narrative in it, but essentially the Torah is supposed to be a book of laws. Were we to ask the question of what was Moshe handed on Har Sinai, like these parshas that we're looking at, Yisro, Mishpatim, next week's parsha, Kisisa, when Moshe comes down with the luchos, with the two tablets. So what is it that Moshe was handed? I mean, there's no way, I've mentioned this before, there's no way that Moshe was given the Torah as we have it now, because there is narrative which hadn't happened yet. So Moshe is not being given a blueprint for all the bad things that the Jewish people are going to be doing. That's ridiculous. But what Moshe was given was HaTorah v'HaMitzvah. That's what the Torah tells us. He was given the laws. So if Moshe is given all the laws, and the way in which it's distributed in the Torah was just over time, and Moshe was instructed at the end of his life how to put it all together, so we understand that the Torah is primarily meant to be a law book. And however we count the mitzvos, we're all familiar with the number. How many mitzvos? 613. Okay, there are clearly more mitzvos than 613 in the Torah. Why that number is given is because of a drasha. I'm not going to get into now, but there are 613. By the way, just to prove the point, every book that enumerates the 613 mitzvos, they all get to this magical number 613. But guess what? Not all their lists are the same. And if not all their lists are the same, while some may say, no, that's not officially a mitzvah, it's hard to sell that, because for this guy it is a mitzvah, for this guy it's not. So therefore there are probably, surely more than 613 mitzvahs in the Torah, despite the magical number 613. But if it's not mentioned in the Torah, can it be a mitzvah? The answer is yes. In Parsha Shoftim we're told that we follow the laws just as how the teachers are going to tell you, and therefore we have, in addition to mitzvos d'oraisa, in addition to mitzvos that are in the Torah, we have mitzvos d'Rabbanan. There are mitzvos which were given to us from the rabbis, and we're familiar with them all. We practice them throughout the year, and the Sheva mitzvos d'Rabbanan, the 7 official rabbinic mitzvos are lighting candles on Shabbos and Yantif, using the Eruv, right? Being able to carry on Shabbos. Oh, thank you. Okay, being able to carry on Shabbos through the use of an Eruv. Saying Hallel on special days, okay, such as Yom Tov, Chol Moed, etc. Rosh Chodesh is an interesting discussion. It's a different story, whether it's actually a mitzvah d'Rabbanan or whether it is in fact a custom. Washing for bread, saying blessings in general. There's only one bracha according to the Torah that we have to say, and saying brachos on mitzvos, or saying brachos when we eat fruit or eat food, or saying brachos for things which we see. Those are all rabbinic. Okay, the only blessing which is midoraisa, Torah obligation, is Birkas Hamazon, right? To be v'chalta v'savata uveirachta. That's a pasuk which we all know. And the any mitzvahs associated with Hanukkah, such as lighting candles, and any mitzvahs associated with Purim, the different laws of Purim, which we're going to get to in our pre-Purim class in a few weeks. Those are the rabbinic mitzvahs. So, of course, can there be mitzvahs that are not written in the Torah? Yes, but it's limited to that. At the same time, there are different categories of laws which are considered sacrosanct, and they're certainly up there in terms of how we practice our Jewish lives. For example, there's a category of, I'm just going to call it halachos because that's what it's entitled. But halacha l'Moshe Sinai, a term which I'm sure many of us are familiar with, a law given to Moshe at Sinai. So the Rambam, in his introduction to the Mishnayos, has a list actually of a number of things which are considered halacha l'Moshe Sinai. There are things which people nowadays claim to be halacha l'Moshe Sinai, but if it's not in the Rambam's list, or there are a couple of other places where such a list exists, but if it's not in a list of official halacha l'Moshe Sinai's, people can say that they're halacha l'Moshe Sinai, but the fact is they are not. I'm going to get to one in a few moments because it's near and dear to my heart to a certain degree, and that is the mitzitza, one of the practices of bris milah. There are people who claim that it's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai to do mitzitza. It's not, and certainly to do it in the way that those in the, we'll call it the right-wing specter of the Jewish community suggest. They claim that it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and it's certainly not the case. It's not even a halacha, it's a minhag, and it's not me'akev. In other words, if it's not done, a person is still kosher. But having said that, we'll leave that aside for now. So just to give a couple of examples of things which are halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So the Rambam says, an 11-day period between nida l'nida. In other words, after a woman becomes a menstruant, so there's an 11-day period until the nida status can go away. Okay, that's one example. I'm not going to go through all of these, but all the laws related to how tefillin are put together. how the parchment is supposed to be written, and that it's supposed to be black, and what the knot of the tefillin is supposed to look like, and that it's supposed to be square, for example. Those are a number of the things which are halacha l'Moshe Sinai. How we write a Sefer Torah, for example. Rules related to the status of, and this is a hypothetical and theoretical law, but if something happens to a child under the age of 3, a girl that is, that puts her virginity into question, for example, which is a horrible situation. But halachically, what is she considered? So according to halacha l'Moshe Sinai, when she gets married, she's considered to be a virgin, which would determine the what the amount of money owed to her by her husband on her kasuba would be based on a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. A number of examples related to the rules of planting and orla and different shiurim, the amounts of what is considered to be a kazayas and what is considered to be a kibetza, and therefore how much different amounts and measurements. These are halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Okay, that an eruv can be done with wine. Okay, with yayin kasha, that is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Rules related to if an Ammonite and a Moabite are allowed to bring maisros, the tithes in the times of the Beis Hamikdash. These are halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Okay, now at the same time, as much as this is a very high level and high caliber halacha, there are many examples of when halacha is called a mitzvah. Halacha is called a mitzvah. Just to bring a couple, I'm going to go through the Shulchan Aruch, some examples from the Shulchan Aruch in a few minutes. But what does it mean when halacha, when the Shulchan Aruch, for example, calls something to be a mitzvah? Is it actually a mitzvah? You look at what it says in the Shulchan Aruch, and we're familiar with the Torah. Some of these things are not addressed in the Torah at all. We addressed last in our last class, for example, we talked about which was the one related to mourning, and not in other words, how to deal with somebody pre-death and after death. So one of the things which we saw at the time was the Shulchan Aruch says that it's a mitzvah that if somebody's dying, not to leave them when they're dying. Where does that mention in the Torah? It's not mentioned in the Torah. There's no discussion in the Torah about where to be when somebody's at death's door. So the Shulchan Aruch nonetheless calls that a mitzvah. Is that really a mitzvah? No. So I think that in general, when the Shulchan Aruch utilizes the term mitzvah to describe certain halachos, it's probably emphasizing the importance of them and how we in general should subscribe to at least pay careful attention to follow these dikduke halachos, these exact halachos. For example, I'm just going to give a quick hit list of a number of things which the Shulchan Aruch calls a mitzvah. It says it's a mitzvah to hold your tzitzis in your left hand when you're saying Shema. Is that in the Torah? No. The mitzvah in the Torah is to wear the tzitzis. Okay, there's another thing that the Shulchan Aruch says related to that. He says that there's a custom to look at the tzitzis when a person says Uri Isamoso, you have to see the mitzvos, and a person does that. He says it's a minhag yafeh, it's a nice custom, v'chivuve mitzvah, and it shows a love of the mitzvah. Okay, so that's not such a big deal. And the Ramah says some have the custom as well to kiss the tzitzis when you see them. All right, so is that a mitzvah to kiss the tzitzis? No, not a mitzvah to kiss the tzitzis, but it's a chibuv of a mitzvah, so that's a different type of status and category. It says here the next thing that the Shulchan Aruch says with reference to mitzvah, he says that the outside of the tefillin mitzvah la'asoso shachor. It's a mitzvah to make it black. Is it a mitzvah? So I just mentioned before, according to the Rambam, that's not a mitzvah, it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. What is halacha l'Moshe Sinai? Is it the same caliber as being a mitzvah? I think that the answer is no, it's not. Is it a strong law? Absolutely. But what happens if a person's tefillin is not completely black? As a person who's wearing tefillin, are they not fulfilling the mitzvah if it's not completely black? So we can have the argument about that. Certainly it's not on the highest level of fulfilling the mitzvah, but does it mean that the mitzvah is not being fulfilled because it's not completely black? A person needs to be so exact. I don't think that that's the case. The Shulchan Aruch says in the laws of Kriya Shema, even though it's a mitzvah, the dakdek ba'os yoseh, to be very careful about how a person reads every letter and every vowel of the Shema, of course, in every word. So kara v'lo dikdek bahen yatsa. If a person read it and was not exact, not precise in the reading, the person has fulfilled their obligation. Well, which one is it? Is it a mitzvah to be exact and precise, or is it not a mitzvah? If it's a mitzvah, and then the Shulchan Aruch has an allowance for somebody who reads incorrectly, so clearly it's not exactly a mitzvah because a person can still fulfill their obligation. Now, if I held a lulav which is not kosher, okay, have I fulfilled my mitzvah of shaking a lulav on Sukkot? Anybody? No. So, do you have to be precise, or do you not have to be precise? Do you have to do it right, or do you not have to do it right? So to say that the mitzvah is to read it precisely, but if you don't, then you're still yotzei, and clearly the mitzvah is not only to read it precisely. The mitzvah is to read it, however you're going to read it. So when the Shulchan Aruch says mitzvah, it doesn't really mean mitzvah. It really means halacha. Okay? A couple of more examples. Here's one. Okay, the Shulchan Aruch tells us that when the Torah is lifted up, it's after Hag Ben Galila, when the Torah is going to be put back. So it says, mitzvah l'kol mi she'overes l'fanav l'labosa ad l'fnei ha'aron shemachnisin osasham. There's a mitzvah for everybody who sees the Torah, or for whom the Torah passes them, to accompany it until it gets to the ark. Okay, and I've actually seen this in smaller shuls, where everybody who the Torah passes by, they actually follow, and it becomes a train of people coming. In our shul, the custom is that one person follows the Torah. Maybe that shouldn't be the case. But is it a mitzvah? Where in the Torah does it say that you have to follow the Torah when it's walking around a shul? Torah never says that. So what does it mean when it says mitzvah? So I think that it's fair to say that the term mitzvah, because sometimes in kindergarten or in school, the teacher will say to the child, do a mitzvah and pick up that pencil. Anybody? Where does the Torah say that you have to pick up a pencil? That that's a mitzvah. I don't think it's a mitzvah. It's setting into a mindset that mitzvah means to do something right. And perhaps in halacha, sometimes when it uses the word mitzvah, it means to do something right. Okay, just to give one more example. Okay, the Shulchan Aruch says that here's go. Here's the halacha. That a person has to behave in a certain way, right, in a very nice way when in the synagogue. And then going on to describe one of the ways that a person behaves properly without spoken kalos rosh, says a person should sometimes be sitting in a shul. Why? Because yeshiva behen mitzvah. Because sitting in it is a mitzvah. Sitting in this place. Shenamar, as it says, ashrei yoshevei v'secha. And where's ashrei yoshevei v'secha? Praised are those who sit. That's a pasuk in Tehillim. You know that. So, is that a mitzvah if it's in Tehillim? Of course not. Anything which is written in Tehillim, it may inform a halacha, it may inform a practice, it may inform a minhag, but it's not automatically a mitzvah. There are many other examples. I don't want to get bogged down in it now, but that is one point to take from the Shulchan Aruch. Now, there's another category of things which the Shulchan Aruch calls not just mitzvah, but mitzvah min hamuvchar. Mitzvah min hamuvchar means an ideal way. In other words, a much higher level of mitzvah. But again, owing to the suggestion that the use of the word mitzvah in the Shulchan Aruch doesn't automatically mean mitzvah, I think we can apply the same ruling to these laws. For example, the Shulchan Aruch says that when it comes to benching, and in other words, when it's done with a zimun, mitzvah min hamuvchar levarech halakos. Right, it's ideal to bench using a cup. In other words, to have a cup of wine when doing so. Where in the Torah does it say that? It doesn't say that. There's no. We could say that that's an extension of the mitzvah of benching. Very nice. But he goes even further and says that if a person is going to be benching with a cup, mitzvah min hamuvchar levarech al hayayin, to make the bracha on wine. Okay, there are ways that we elevate things for sure, but that doesn't automatically mean that this is a mitzvah. It is probably more along the lines of halacha. We've been learning these halachos after shul in the morning. That when they're doing the benching as well over a cup of wine. So mitzvah min hamuvchar sheyitamu kulam, that everybody who's around there is supposed to take a taste of that wine. Is that a mitzvah? Where does it say that everybody who's supposed to, in the Torah, that everybody who is present at the time of a benching needs to be drinking from the wine. And there are many other examples in the Shulchan Aruch to that effect. I wanted to mention a couple more here. 1 second. But I have such a long list of everything. Hold on. There's one related to bris milah that I wanted to share with you. Here we go. Okay, in the laws of bris milah. Okay, this is a good one. So the Shulchan Aruch tells us, bakol malin. Okay, we can circumcise using any type of instrument. The most famous instrument for doing circumcision in the Torah was done by Tzipora. What did she use? Okay, a rak. She took a rak. So the Shulchan Aruch says, afilu b'tzur, b'schuchis, even with a rock, even a piece of glass, anything which cuts, okay, except for a reed which could make a splinter. Okay, so we don't do that. Okay, right? We can flinch now. However, mitzvah min hamuvchar, the ideal mitzvah, the ideal performance of this mitzvah is to do it babarzel, with steel. Bein b'sakin, bein b'misparayim, whether with a knife or with scissors. V'nahagu lamul b'sakin, and the custom is to use a knife. Now, of course, anybody who's familiar with these laws knows, or at least with the way bris milah is done, any moil uses a knife, and they don't use scissors to do this. But is it mitzvah min hamuvchar? Where in the Torah does it say how to do it? The whole point is to get it done. But how it's done enters into the realm of halacha and enters into the realm of discussion related to practice. But it certainly doesn't fall into the realm of what is mandated by the Torah. Okay, so what is the difference between halacha and minhag? That's the next question on the page. What is the difference between halacha and minhag? So halacha, as I mentioned before, is either something which is halacha l'Moshe Sinai, which was given to Moshe at Sinai but wasn't written down, was just transmitted from generation to generation, or it was developed over time through what we call the Torah Sheba'al Peh, but the oral tradition, the Mishnah, the conversations in the Talmud, and eventually recorded by the codifiers of law, Rambam, Shulchan Aruch, etc., and of course over time through the discussions that exist in the responsa literature that have been around for over 1,000 years, certainly since the time of the Gaonim. How is halacha developed? So one of the methods which we're familiar with, certainly those who come to shul every morning and who say karbanos, we say the Bryce of Rabbi Yishmael. What is the Bryce of Rabbi Yishmael? It's the last thing in karbanos, which talks about how b'shalosh esrei midos haTorah nedreshes behen. There are 13 ways in which essentially halacha is determined. I'm not going to go through it now, but you can read through it and try to understand what those principles are. They're called the 13 hermeneutic principles in English. Hillel, I believe, also had his own list of hermeneutic principles, but the number that he had were 7. And halacha essentially develops over time, depending on sometimes sociology, sometimes a time and place of where people live. And of course, a response to a response in some cases to the climate where they are, or to the just as an example, one of the halachos which is discussed with reference to sukkahs is whether a person needs to sleep in the sukkah. So what does the Mishnah Berurah say? It says, well, it's freezing where we live, so it's not really good to sleep in the sukkah. You don't have to. Well, I live in South Florida. We all live in South Florida. Those of us who are here during sukkahs know that is it ever freezing during sukkahs? Okay, no, it could be otherwise uncomfortable to sleep in the sukkah, but certainly not because of the cold, but because it's very hot. So to say that the halacha is determined based on the cold is ridiculous. Certainly in the land of Israel, it's very comfortable. So to sleep in the sukkah, the only time I've ever slept in the sukkah successfully was when I was in Israel for sukkahs, because you can do that. You usually don't have to worry about the rain, and depending on where you live, you don't have to worry about slugs, maybe cats you have to worry about. But the last time I tried sleeping in the sukkah in New York, I woke up in a rainstorm with 6 slugs on me and 2 cats in my face. I said, that's enough. I'm not sleeping in the sukkah in this country anymore. Okay. Now, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein has a fascinating article which you can find on the internet. It was published in Tradition 36, volume 36 in 2002, entitled The Human and Social Factor in Halacha. I don't want to present his entire article here, but I do want to share with you just a little bit about from what Rav Aaron said there. Rav Aaron said, okay, I want to read a little bit from here. He says, later poskim enjoyed lesser standing than that of Chazal with respect to either being right or final. We can take license attitudinally to explain the prescription of kilayim differently from the Ramban. These are things which he discussed in his article. And it's not inconceivable that at some point fully responsible and fully committed Gedolim will re-examine the Maharim Mullen's position regarding women's wearing tzitzis. With respect to halachic issues which verge upon public policy, particularly might feel that at times response to events has impacted upon the course of decision. Nevertheless, broadly speaking, our commitment to halacha and its authority entails faith in the integrity of the halachic process and its outcome. And he concludes his article with what he calls 3 brief comments. One, in halacha, which pertains to the personal. Some people are familiar with the idea that you can ask, 2 people can ask a rabbi the same question and they'll get different answers. Why? Because halachically, or the halacha may apply differently depending on external circumstances related, which are unique to each individual. So that's one point that Rav Lichtenstein addresses. He addresses another point related to public policy when it comes to this question of how psak is developed, and he concludes with one final paragraph which I'm going to share. He says, finally, we need in candor to avoid merely stonewalling realities or sidestepping issues. No one questions the fact that in some instances our primary sources and our primal attitudes diverge. Moreover, it is not our baser predatory instincts, but our nobler spiritual self which is engaged. And the problem is not one of chukim as opposed to mishpatim. On the contrary, the eating of pork and wearing of shatnez, with respect to which the Torah has constructed an arena ex nihilo and has established the ground rules for working within it, pose relatively little philosophic difficulty. That is more likely to arise, if at all, where halacha has confronted areas imminent in the human condition and has legislated with respect to them. Broadly speaking, Chosh and Ishbar and Even Ezer are fraught with greater difficulty than Orach Chaim or Yoredeya. And he goes on to discuss how halacha has developed over time and how people respond to it, owing to their, and how it's informed based on their respect for halachic system and people trying to do what's right. And Rav Lichtenstein addresses some very touch to the heart types of questions. For example, the Aguna crisis, which we're familiar with. Once upon a time, it was a little more understandable in terms of how it could be such a difficult tragedy, because it was usually when somebody was missing, owing to travel on a ship somewhere, or going to war and not having the ways of following up if a person was killed in combat or whatnot, as opposed to the modern day Aguna, which generally speaking, the exception in recent times of like 9/11, for example, the OU spent a lot of time trying to free 9/11 Agunas. And they had a pretty good idea that people whose husbands disappeared were gone, based on testimony and witnesses being able to ascertain that a person was in the towers at the time. So that's a unique example. Unfortunately, nowadays we know about the modern aguna problem, which is when a husband refuses to give a get, or in some cases a wife refuses to accept a get, which doesn't make her an aguna, it just makes her a person who is not accepting a get, but nonetheless. Okay, so that's with reference to halacha. When it comes to minhagim, on the other hand, they develop. And really, it relates to how a community addresses certain practices. There's an old joke about, I'm sure many of you have heard it, because it's a joke which has been around for a while, about a new rabbi who comes to a town, and he sees in shul on Shabbos, when everybody's there, that half the people get up when they get up to the Shema, to recite the Shema, and some people are sitting down. And there's a debate whether Shema is supposed to be recited sitting or standing, right? Whether he's supposed to be standing or sitting, and it's driving him crazy, because there should be 1 minute for the whole shul. So he finds out that there's one 90-year-old man in a nursing home who used to be, was one of the founders of the shul. So he says, you know what, I'm going to go over to this guy and I'm going to ask him. So he goes in and he finds out, Mr. Goldstein, all right, Mr. Goldstein, can you please tell me, I'm the new rabbi in the shul that you started. Okay, when we get up to Shema, half the people stand up. Is that the minhag? And Mr. Goldstein says, no, this is not the minhag. He says, well, half the people, they sit down for Shema. He says, no, this is not the minhag. He says, well, the rest of the time everybody's yelling at each other about what they should be doing. He says, yeah, that was the minhag. So is that how minhagim develop? That's certainly a joke, but some minhagim which develop over time, which certainly are not in the Torah, are things which we're familiar with. So for example, the Torah says, Tashbisu se'arbe batechem. Get rid of the chametz from your house on Pesach. How many people have chametz in their house on Pesach? Don't all raise your hand. Okay, now you don't own it. You don't own it, but you're selling your chametz. Okay, it's a very interesting discussion about how that minhag developed. Okay, but what's the halacha? What's the mitzvah? The mitzvah is to get rid of the chametz. So if you don't own it, fine. There's a customary way to get out of it, which is within halacha. Fine. But obviously the ideal is to get rid of one's chametz. A person shouldn't be resorting to selling chametz unless there's a tremendous loss. If you're selling $50 worth of chametz and that's all that you have in your house, you're doing it wrong. You shouldn't be selling $50 worth of chametz. If you're selling thousands of dollars worth of chametz, different story. Okay, but we should be aware. There's a halacha that firstborns are supposed to fast on Erev Pesach. Okay, that's the halacha. What's the minhag? The minhag is you have a siyum. Okay, so there you show how a minhag kind of in its own way supersedes the halacha. There is a concept that minhag Yisrael Torah, that a custom of the Jewish people is Torah. In other words, it's the law, and the way in which we follow is that we try to practice that minhag, even if that minhag in some cases seems to be wrong or founded on something which is perhaps inapplicable. I'm going to get into minhag tos in a few minutes. I once heard of Herschel Schachter quote Rabbi Soloveitchik to say that if a person has a minhag in a family, you should keep your minhag, with two exceptions. Two exceptions are if outside of the land of Israel, if your custom is to not eat in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, you should eat in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. And that's number one. Number two is if you have a square knot in your tefillin, shel rosh, that you should turn it into a dalet. You should get it turned into a dalet because the square knot is a mistake and it's wrong. Okay, fine. There are other minhagim that we're all familiar with as well, which have developed over time and have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, some of which bother some of us, okay? For example, eating the non-eating of kitnios on Pesach, okay? Observing the second day of Yom Tov, the Yom Tov Sheni. It's a minhag. It's a very strong minhag, which has been around for thousands of years. And do we need to do that today? So this is an interesting question which is raised on account of the fact that the people in Israel, we have Jewish people who live in Israel now, and Chazra, right? Chazra, Torah, in that way, right? The Torah practices have returned to the land of Israel, and in a way, it's informing or changing the way people view things. Now, people who don't want to practice Yom Tov Sheni move to Israel. That's the simplest way, or they just go to Israel for every Yom Tov. Okay, that's certainly one way to do it. What about kitnios? So this is a discussion which has been coming up even more on account of the way society in Israel is integrating. Much of the population of Israel comes from Sephardic lands, and of course, the custom in Sephardic culture is to eat kitnios on Pesach. Is kitnios chametz? Of course not. We all know that it's not chametz. Where the practice of not eating kitnios on Pesach comes from is Ashkenazic lands, and it was never applicable to Sephardim. And because the food manufacturers in Israel, in many cases, are Sephardim, so to create food which has traces of kitnios in it, or kitnios straight, but is deemed to be kosher Pesach. In Israel, it's becoming increasingly harder for Ashkenazim to buy food for Pesach because it all has kitnios in it. And so there are modern-day poskim who are saying, if your custom was in such a way, but this is the land of Israel, and the land of Israel is becoming such that a majority of the people are, I don't know if it's true, numbers-wise, the majority of the people are Sephardim versus Ashkenazim. So we can say there's another principle in halacha, which is hakol k'minhag medina, that you follow the custom of the land, and whatever the custom of the land is something which a person is supposed to follow. A person may have come from a shul in Chicago where the practice was to do one thing. You come to Boynton Beach, the practice is to do something else. Guess what? You're going to change. My grandfather, Shalom, davened most of his life. He davened nusach. I'm trying to remember. You know what? I don't even remember. I think he davened Nusach Sfard all of his life, and then he, for the last 15 years, he davened in a place which was Nusach Ashkenaz, and he stopped davening in Nusach Sfard. And I remember him telling me, all my life I davened in one Nusach, but the last 15 years I've been davening in a different shul, so I started to do Minhag Ashkenaz. Okay, and I think that Hakol K'minhag Medina is an important principle which is applicable certainly in a shul and maybe in a place like Israel where the demographics are essentially laying the ground rules for what people are practicing. Is it a minhag that only applies under certain social conditions or under certain technological conditions? Okay, so sometimes we have to look back and say, what is the reason for the minhag? Where did it come from? So I mentioned mitzitza before. Mitzitza is the act of drawing out blood from the circumcision after the removal of the foreskin, which is actually mentioned in the Talmud. But the Talmud talks about mitzitza as being one of 3 acts that are supposed to be done at a bris. But the Talmud also makes it very clear that the whole reason for doing mitzitza is because it's dangerous if you don't. Now, that's a reflection of medical knowledge of the time, when there were toxins and they didn't know how to do sterility, and hygiene was unknown in terms of what the germ theory was. But nowadays, when medical practice certainly does not recommend ever, with the exception, I think, of drawing poison from a snake bite out of somebody's the puncture, it's never recommended to put a mouth on a wound. So we can say that medical practice frowns upon such a thing. So if it was once upon a time a custom to do that, so we can say that not sociology, but medicine has changed, and you could say sociology has changed, where this type of behavior is not acceptable, and it's not something which should be done. So perhaps though it was a custom for a long time, because there was no other way to do it, to do mitzitza by putting the mouth directly on the wound. But there's no justification for such a practice today. There is a series of books written by Rabbi Daniel Sperber called Minhagei Yisrael. It's a green set, and I only have a couple of volumes, but they're in storage, so I wasn't able to look at them. But I remember one of the first articles that he has in there is about the Minhagei Avelus, the customs of Avelus during Sfira time. Right there, we're familiar with the idea that Rabbi Akiva's students died during the time period of Sfira, and therefore we have customs related to how we practice. Right? What's the main one that everybody knows? No weddings. How many people have been to weddings in Sfira? Everybody, please raise your hand. Okay, so that custom is clearly something which is, but I don't do it during this time period of Sfira because I practice one way, and people practice a different way every year. Thank God. I mean, hopefully, most people are only getting married once. So your own wedding doesn't take place during Sfira Omer because you got married once. My grandmother, I remember, told me. I said to her, "What was your anniversary?" She says, "Lag BaOmer." Okay, so apparently, in 1945, the custom was for everybody to get married on Lag BaOmer. Maybe not everybody, but I know some people still do that, Lag BaOmer, because you got to follow the custom of not getting married in the first 33 days of the Omer, or at least the first 32 days. Okay, but in there, Sperber talks about where the customs came from and how it was really developed over time. And even though the Talmud talks about certain elements of mourning practices, M-O-U-R-N, mourning practices, but the fact is that the only one which is really applicable is the one about getting married. But otherwise, as far as shaving, as far as listening to music, those are probably stemming from a place of what we call a minhag ta'us. There was a custom brought down in the Shulchan Aruch to bury on the second day of Yom Tov, on Yom Tov Sheni, or right away, not on Yom Tov. Okay, how often is that one followed? So in Israel it's still followed, but in many cases we're all familiar with funerals which are pushed off so that the children of the deceased, the siblings of the deceased, the grandchildren can show up. How do we allow for such a thing if the halacha is such? And the answer is because society has changed. We have this concept of refrigeration, and refrigeration prevents the decomposing of the body, and it preserves the dignity of the mace in a certain way. And so the halacha has changed. Who's ever heard of, with the exception of Hasidic communities who may have a cemetery right outside their town, who's ever heard of anybody having a burial on Yom Tov Sheni? Doesn't happen. Doesn't happen. And that's because because of the change in society. I once heard a story. I don't even know if this is true, if it's apocryphal, about a place where they had the custom to not wear shoes with laces on Shabbos. Okay, why would that be? Maybe because it was in a town where people were not really familiar with the laws, and they said, you know what, if the lace breaks, so I may end up carrying on Shabbos, and so therefore. So I don't know if it's an apocryphal story, but nonetheless. Okay, there's what? Do they have to wear socks? Yes, they should wear socks. Okay. When it comes to minhagim as well, there's something, and in some cases halacha, there's something called a chumrah. A chumrah is when a person takes upon oneself a stringency. Is that halacha or is that a minhag? Of course it's a minhag. Of course it's not always a halacha. I remember Rav Amital Zichrono Livracha, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of Gush Etzion, the founding Rosh Yeshiva, the Yeshiva Gush Etzion. So one of his students asked him how come he was not careful about a certain chumrah that was mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch, whatever it was, and he said, because the Shulchan Aruch says, "V'hamachmir tavo alav bracha." He says, "I'm not so holy to be machmir, to be stringent upon that. Somebody who can be, let him be blessed. But I'm not such a holy Jew that I can do that." There is a concept of something which is called a minhag shtus. A minhag shtus is a foolish minhag which comes from nowhere. This is probably a funny story, but it's told about a fellow who has this custom that he every Shabbos morning at 6 o'clock in the morning he gets up and he drinks a shot of whiskey. Okay, so somebody was visiting him and he says, "Oh, this is your minhag. Where'd you get this from?" He says, "My father. This is what my father used to do." So the guy who's asking him about it says, "Where was your father from?" So it turns out the guy's father was from the Ukraine. He was a Hasidic Jew. And every Shabbos morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, he would get up, go down to the river, bore a hole in the ice, dunk, right, to do his mikvah on a Shabbos morning. And he'd come home at 6 o'clock in the morning as this shnook was waking up. And the only way that he could warm himself up on Shabbos was by taking a shot of whiskey. So the son wakes up and says, minhag, that's my father did, 6 o'clock in the morning, a shot of whiskey. What about getting down, being a frum Jew who goes down to the mikvah, which is also a chumrah, by the way. You don't have to do that, but nonetheless. How binding are halachos? So it depends. When it comes to halachos, it depends. Are they actually halachos? Are they required practices, or are they recommended practices? I remember when I was in Gush, we asked Rav Amital, who I just mentioned a moment ago, some of the halachos in the beginning of the Shulchan Aruch, they're written down as halachos, are that when you get dressed in the morning, you're supposed to put on your right shoe first, and then your left shoe, and then tie your left shoe, and then tie your right shoe. So we asked him, Rav Amital, really? And he said, look, it's an ideal. If you can do it, great. If it doesn't hurt you, great. But is God going to get you because you didn't put your shoes on in the proper way? He says, no, that's not what it means. It's just an ideal. It's showing that Judaism has something to say about every aspect of your life. We learned about the laws of Mayim Achronim here in the shul after davening, and the first seif in the section about Mayim Achronim says Mayim Achronim chova. Mayim Achronim is obligatory. Okay? The last seif in the laws of Mayim Achronim say, and if you don't do Mayim Achronim, that's okay too. Well, which one is it? So clearly it's a minhag, or you could say it's a halacha, but it's not a halacha which is binding. Today, we just did the one about workers benching. The Shulchan Aruch says that if you have people who work in your house who are Jewish, right, they eat with you, so they can say a shortened version of benching, which includes skipping the last bracha of the benching. And then in the very next seif, the Shulchan Aruch says, but nowadays we're a little more careful. We want our workers to bench, so we're not, we don't allow them to do that. It's more important to us that they actually bench. But the halacha allows for them not to bench the complete benching. So which one is it? Somebody once told me a halacha, because some people they get very hung up about their minhagim. I don't remember who told me this, but somebody said to me recently that they should have made the laws of lashon hara minhagim instead of halachos, because people are so careful about minhagim, about customs, that people would actually follow the laws of lashon hara if they were customs. Okay, there was a funny thing which I saw in the yeshivaworld.com. From a year ago, where somebody said, okay, let's all post about what's a halacha, what's a minhag, what's a chumrah, and what is shtus. Shtus is foolishness. So some of these people are very funny, and I'm just going to share with you some of them just to lighten up, and of course because as I said before, you're not allowed to sleep in the shul. So let's do this anyway. So halacha, one guy writes, you may not speak lashon hara. Minhag, we do it anyhow. Chumrah, at least we don't say the name. Shtus, when you finish saying your piece, you yell at the next guy, lashon hara, lashon hara. Okay, another guy wrote here, one second. Reciting Hallel, okay, this one's not funny. Reciting Hallel on Yom Tov is halacha. Minhag, reciting Hallel on Rosh Chodesh. The Chumrah is reciting Hallel in a synagogue on the first 2 nights of Pesach, in case you won't say it at the Seder. Oops. Okay. And Shtus is refusing to help your wife clean up because you have to recite Hallel at the Seder while being totally oblivious to the fact that she too is obligated in saying Hallel at the Seder. Okay. Halacha, not drinking pig's milk. Minhag, waiting 6 hours between meat and milk. Chumrah, making kiddush only on unsweetened wine. Shtus, Calling somebody else's posts shtus. Okay. Halacha, reciting Hallel on Yontif. Minhag, reciting Hallel on Rosh Chodesh. Again, this is the yeshivish website. Shtus, saying Hallel on Yom HaAtzmaut. Ooh, okay. I'll give you two more. Halacha, my psak. Minhag, my minhag. Chumrah, your psak. Shtus, your minhag. Halacha, not eating chametz on Pesach. Minhag, not eating kidneyos on Pesach. Chumrah, not eating gebraks on Pesach. Shtus, not eating matzah that has been in the same room as water on Pesach. I mean, I could go on and on. Some of these are very funny. Well, maybe I'll do one or two more. Halacha, covering hair. Minhag, shaving head. Chumrah, cutting shadels short. Could also be added to shtus. Shtus, thinking you will save the world by having a shorter sheitel. Halacha, need to eat. Minhag, what to eat. Chumrah, not eating at all. Shtus, overeating. All right, people have... Okay, so that was just for laughs and hopefully brought us back to where we are. What happens when custom contradicts halacha? So there is a tshuva which I have here from the Mishnah Halachos from Rabbi Menashe Klein, where he talks about how if the minhag contradicts halacha, there is room for that, and it's not something. And this happens a lot. I'm not going to bring examples because I want to try to be aware of the time. But there is room for if the minhag contradicts the halacha. Sometimes the minhag is stronger. Kitnios is a classic example, okay, of a minhag contradicting halacha. Another example. I gave a shir on Shavuos this year, a tshuva of the Rush. The Rush talked about how tefillas tal, the prayer for dew. He lived in France and he said, look, we need more rain. And maybe it's not a good idea to say tefillas tal on Pesach when we should really say it on Shavuos. We need rain from Pesach until Shavuos. And there you have an example of I mean, I don't even think it's a halacha, but where a minhag is so strong that as much as his logic is 100% right, and his tshuva, we went through it here in Shul, is fantastic, but nonetheless, nobody wanted to jump on board because people were afraid of changing the minhag. Can you imagine?
Blowing the shofar on Shabbos.
Right, okay, blowing the shofar on Shabbos is a good example. I mean, the mitzvah is, yes, you absolutely do that, but the halacha, which is based on a minhag, is that we don't, because of other reasons which are not really applicable today. We're certainly in a neighborhood that has an eruv. When can a person change one's minhag? So the truth is, this is a little bit more of a difficult question. I heard a story about Rabbi Moshe, I think it was Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik, if I'm not mistaken, that he was living in a place where there was a certain garb which was proper, that Jews had been wearing for a long time, but owing to the fact that modernity was creeping in, he said, look, if I'm going to be able to branch out in the world, I need to be able to wear a suit and a tie and not make this be the clothing of the goyim. So what did he do? He moved to another city. I don't remember which city it was, but he moved to another city, and it might not have been Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, whatever it was. Okay, but he moved to another city where the Jews had already come with the times, and they were dressing in this more modern fashion. And when he went to a place where osin minhag hamagam she'alach l'sham, where you follow the custom of where you've gone to, so he was able to wear more modern clothing because that's what the Jews in that town were doing. So if you follow the practice of minhag hamakom, then that is certainly applicable. When it comes to switching from Ashkenazic to Sephardic customs, so if you're going to do it, you got to follow with everything. So you're going to start eating kidneyos, okay, but you got to get up early every day of Elul to say slichos. No, but I once heard Rabbi Mordechai Willig say, you can't do that. If you're Ashkenazic, you're Ashkenazic. If you're Sephardic, you're Sephardic. There is an interesting question which is raised: what happens if a person is becoming a Baal Tshuva, doesn't know what the family custom is? If a person is converting, do you have to do one way or the other? And the answer is, depending on who you're learning with, you can convert to be a Sephardic, or you can convert to being an Ashkenazi person, depending on where you're from. I have a whole list of a number of topics related to minhag, which I wanted to share with you, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to. I want to conclude with the last two questions. Do all halachos remain canonized even if society changes? So this is an interesting question when it comes to learning halacha. If a person is going to read, for example, through the Shulchan Aruch, through the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, there are a lot of things which you're going to see in there which don't reflect our society, don't reflect our culture, and one could make the argument that they're inapplicable now, that they're just not things which we do. Does that mean that halacha is thrown out? I think that the answer is no, because who knows, society evolves all the time and things could become applicable once again. I mean, things which are about a technologically deficient society or culture may not ever come around again, if assuming that the electrical boards remain functioning and that the society, the advanced society which we have, continues in the trajectory that it is. So the halachos may not be practiced, but they still remain, and it's important to bear that in mind and to be respectful to the halachas, even if they're not applicable anymore. Are we to be more careful about one over the other? And this is the bottom line about the observant life. The observant life has a hierarchy. Mitzvos are number one. And of course, mitzvos, because they're number one, people should learn the mitzvos, people should know the mitzvos, and people should do everything that they can to fulfill mitzvos as best as possible. And it begins with knowledge. And when it comes to halacha, I think that a similar rule would apply, simply because it's all about knowledge. The Torah that was given to us are two Torahs, Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh. And the halachos which we have from the Torah Shebal Peh, from the oral Torah, are all, again, things which we need to know, things which we need to learn. And every opportunity which comes, we should be continuing to expand our knowledge and our understanding. And right now in Shul, we're learning about Hilchos brachos, the laws of brachos. And many brachos are things which we're not aware of, not familiar with. And I think the brachos is just a classic example of how, if we say the brachos, and if we're aware, even if we don't say them, but if we're aware of the brachos that we could be saying, it helps bring God into our lives in a special way, which everybody needs a reboot and a rebirst of God in our lives, and the concept of brachos helps us remind us of that importance. And of course, that goes into the realm of mitzvahs derabanan, but of course many halachos associated with that. And finally, when it comes to minhag, so minhag is its own type of animal, in the sense that there's something called a minhag shtus or minhag tos, some minhagim, some customs which came about based on mistakes and based on misunderstandings, and that's one realm of understanding what the importance of a minhag. But there are other minhagim which have been around for a very long time, and certainly when they started for a reason which was very significant. Yom Tov Sheni is a classic example. Even Kidnios is an example of things which were started for good reasons. So they've been around for a long time and they're not going to change. But at the same time, there are points when certain minhagim do change. There's an article which I found here, and I'll leave you with this. There's a great website called Mi Yodea. In English, it's called Stack Exchange. And where people pose questions just to the community of learners and thinkers and anybody. All you have to do is register. It doesn't cost anything in order to be able to submit something. And one of the questions which was posed here was, at what point do we reject the minhag? That's the question. And the person who's asking the question says, we're familiar with the bracha on chocolate. What's the bracha on chocolate? Shakol, right? But according to Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and according to some others, it would seem to make sense that the bracha on chocolate should actually be, where does chocolate grow? On a tree, so it should be AIDS. And this thing was posted a couple of years ago, but there was actually an article this year, a month ago, which I saw on lifeinisrael.blogspot.com. Interesting psak ha'etz on chocolate, which is an answer to that question. So now the minhag is to say a shahakal on chocolate. But if our knowledge of the situation changes, and if our reality changes to a certain degree, so are we able to reject the minhag? Interesting discussion. I'm certainly not going to weigh in on a psak level, but somebody in Israel, I don't remember who it was, but he said that we should be saying ha'etz on chocolate. We can make the argument. I don't know. By the time we get to the chocolate, there's so much milk in it. So if it's milk chocolate, so I don't know if the same would apply. There's probably more shahakol in it than there is ha'etz. But if it's raw chocolate, and if it's not milk chocolate, then it's certainly something which should be explored further, owing to the way a minhag develops. And in here we'll discuss what does it mean to change a minhag or to reject a minhag because it's no longer applicable? And in some cases it's a valid argument, and in some cases it's not a valid argument, owing to the way in which we value minhagim because of the principle, as I mentioned before, of minhag Yisrael Torahu. So we should all be blessed to be mechazek ourselves and one another, so that we could fulfill mitzvahs and we could fulfill halachas, and that the minhagim that we have, which are valuable, should continue to be valued, and in our observant life, everything that we do, all the actions that we undertake, should be pushing us ever closer to Avinu Shabbat Shemayim.
I'd like you to make a comment on
Which, this glad? Oh, glad meat. So first of all, I'll tell you a joke. This guy sees this farmer's market. It says glatt vegetables. So he comes into the store and he says, glatt vegetables. All right, give me a glatt tomato. The guy behind the counter is Hispanic. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He says, Mr. Glatt, this guy wants a tomato. Okay. So when it comes to glatt, so what does the word glatt mean? Anybody? Smooth. Okay, so smooth means that the certain organs inside the animal, the heart, the liver, not the liver, the lungs, were smooth after the animal was shechted. Okay, so I'm not a shochet. I don't know enough about it. If something is, there are different standards. Is it kosher if it's not glatt? If the people who are supervising the meat say that it's kosher, yes, there is halachas that say that it's kosher, and so it's fine. Am I the funny story that I had? I don't know if it's a funny story, but the funny story that I had is one guy. I told when I was in yeshiva, some guy made a. I think I had mentioned that I had eaten in some meat restaurant in Yerushalayim that had a tu'udah, but it wasn't galat, and it was kosher. And he said to me, "Oh, you're so frum. You're not so frum because you're not so makpid about glatt." Remember, I was 18 at the time. So I said to him, "Do you order special meals when you fly in El Al?" He said, "No." I said, "Then," well, I'm not going to repeat what I said to him at the time, but I said to him, "Mind your own business." Okay, if it's, I'll trust the mashgichim who are reputable. If they say it's kosher, it's fine with me. Anyone else? Okay. What? What do you mean? Can you get in on that? Oh, enjoy it. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a good night.